The sky above Azrath burned crimson, stained by the smoke of orbital bombardment and the flickering light of plasma artillery. 48 hours without rest had left Jasper Hayes hollow-eyed and numb, his medical whites stained with 3 different colors of blood. Most was human red, some the amber gold of the Silvari, and a small splash of his own across the sleeve, where a piece of shrapnel had caught him during the last evacuation run. Dr. Hayes' final evac shuttle departing in 7 minutes. The voice in his earpiece was clipped, professional, betraying none of the panic that was evident in the rushing bodies around the forward medical post. Command confirms this location will be glass in 9. Copy that, Jasper replied mechanically, checking the seal on a portable stasis unit, containing a wounded soldier with burns, over 80% of his body. Prepping final patients for transport now. He barely registered the faces anymore. Human men and women with vacant eyes or screaming mouths, bodies shattered by a war none of them truly understood. The cross-system war had raged for 3 years now, but its origins remained clouded in diplomatic jargon and classified intelligence. All Jasper knew was that humans and Silvari, after 2 centuries of peaceful coexistence, were now attempting to exterminate each other with ruthless efficiency. The ground shook as another orbital strike hit nearby, close enough that dust rained from the prefab shelter's ceiling. The medical monitors flickered, losing power for a heartbeat before the backup generators kicked in. Final patient secured. Jasper called to his assistant medic, a young woman named Torres, whose left arm was in a makeshift sling. She'd refused evacuation earlier, insisting she could still help with her remaining good arm. Get to the shuttle. I'll do one final sweep. Doctor, there's no time. 30 seconds. He cut her off, already moving toward the collapsed eastern wing of what had once been a relatively advanced field hospital. I'll be right behind you. Torres hesitated, then nodded grimly, and began guiding the hovering stretchers toward the exit. The final sweep was protocol, but they both knew it was also a compulsion for Jasper. He couldn't leave without being certain, absolutely certain, that no one was being left behind to die. The eastern wing had taken a direct hit 6 hours ago. They'd already evacuated everyone they could find, but Jasper had this prickling sensation between his shoulder blades, a sense that something wasn't right. He activated his helmet's thermal scanner, switching between frequencies as he moved through the rubble. 5 minutes to evacuation. Nothing. The scan showed only cooling debris, the ambient heat of the desert planet quickly dissipating now that night was falling. He was about to turn back when a flicker caught his eye, a heat signature that didn't match the surrounding patterns. Small, but unmistakably alive. Torres, I've got a signature, he spoke into his comm. Eastern Wing, Section 3. Dr. Command says we're leaving signature or not. They're picking up Silvari scouts approaching our position. Jasper ignored her, moving deeper into the rubble. The signature was strange, not the typical human pattern he was familiar with. Its core temperature was slightly higher, the distribution different. Realization hit him just as he shifted a fallen support beam aside. Silvari. The heat signature was Silvari. And it belonged to a child. She lay, partially buried beneath a tangle of blackened metal, her silvery skin dulled with dust and blood. Her eyes large, faceted like gems, and a deep violet color fluttered weakly as the beam of his headlamp fell across her face. One tiny hand reached toward him, trembling with the effort. For a moment, Jasper froze. Orders were explicit. Clean evac. No foreign objects. No Silvari artifacts. No prisoners. The child was enemy species, perhaps 4 years old, by human standards, and severely injured. The rational choice, the military choice, was to leave her. Dr. Hayes, Torres's voice crackled with static and urgency. 3 minutes to departure. The child made a soft keening sound that transcended language. Pain. Fear. A universal plea that bypassed all of Jasper's training and went straight to something more fundamental. I've got a critically injured civilian, he said, already activating his medical scanner. Preparing for emergency extraction. Dr. Command specifically said, I know what they said. He was moving now, his hands working with practiced precision to assess the child's injuries. Tell the shuttle I'm bringing one more. The scanner's results made his heart sink. Crushed pelvis, punctured lung, internal bleeding, and the beginnings of systemic shock. The child would die without immediate treatment, and even then her chances were slim. What you need is a miracle, little one, he murmured, carefully extracting her from the debris and placing her on his emergency hover stretcher. Her body was lighter than a human child's, would be almost weightless in his arms. And I'm fresh out of those. But I've got Stim's synth blood and old-fashioned stubbornness. Let's see if that's enough. The child's eyes locked onto his, a flicker of recognition, or perhaps just primal hope sparking in their jewel-like depths. A small hand closed weakly around his finger as he administered the first dose of stabilizers. 2 minutes, Doctor. Torres's voice had risen an octave. They're saying they'll leave without you. Then they better be prepared to court-martial a ghost, Jasper muttered, securing the child to the stretcher. He keyed his emergency medical override code into his comms. This is Chief Medical Officer Hayes invoking Protocol 793. I am transporting a critical trauma patient requiring immediate evacuation. Any delay constitutes a violation of Galactic Medical Charter Article 12. There was silence on the other end, then a new voice, harder, with the unmistakable tone of authority. Dr. Hayes, this is Major Trent. Your Protocol 793 is not valid for enemy combatants. Leave the Sylvari and get your ass to the shuttle. That's a direct order. Jasper pushed the hover stretcher forward, moving as fast as he dared given the child's injuries. With respect, Major, she's a child, not a combatant, and the Charter makes no species distinctions. I'll be at the shuttle in 90 seconds. He cut the comm before Trent could respond, focusing instead on navigating the treacherous path back through the ruined hospital. The child's breathing had grown more labored, and the medical monitors showed her condition deteriorating rapidly. Hold on, he told her, though he doubted she understood English. Just a little longer. When he emerged from the ruins, the shuttle was still there, its engines rumbling with impatience. The loading ramp remained down, but standing at its base was Lieutenant Mercer, his posture rigid and his hand resting conspicuously on his sidearm. That's far enough, Dr. Mercer called over the whine of the engines. Major's orders, the Sylvari stays. Jasper didn't slow his approach. She's a child, Lieutenant, 4 years old at most. She's the enemy, Mercer countered. But Jasper noted the man's eyes, flickering to the small figure on the stretcher, a hint of uncertainty crossing his features. Orders are orders, Doctor. Then shoot me, Jasper replied, continuing forward. Because that's the only way I'm leaving her behind. For a tense moment, Jasper thought Mercer might actually draw his weapon. Instead, the lieutenant's shoulders sagged slightly. This is on your head, he muttered, stepping aside. And if that thing wakes up and kills us all in our sleep, I'll personally ensure your court-martial is conducted posthumously. Duly noted, Jasper said, pushing past him into the shuttle's cramped interior. He immediately secured the hover stretcher to the medical bay restraints, already reaching for the more sophisticated equipment the shuttle offered. The doors sealed with a pneumatic hiss, and the shuttle lurched as it lifted off. Through the small viewport, Jasper could see the hospital compound receding, and moments later, the blinding flash as orbital strikes turned the position into superheated glass, just as promised. Someone was shouting Major Trent, red-faced and furious, storming down the central aisle toward the medical bay. But Jasper was already submerged in the familiar rhythm of emergency medicine, his world narrowed to monitors, medications, and the frail silver body fighting for life beneath his hands. What in the 17 hells do you think you're doing, Hayes? Trent's voice cut through his concentration. That's a Sylvari, the same species that glassed New Denver with 6 million civilians still on the ground. This is a child who's never glassed anything, Jasper replied, without looking up, inserting an intravenous line with practiced precision. The Sylvari child's blood was thinner than human blood, with a golden hue that caught the light. And she's dying. So either help me or get out of my medical bay. Your medical bay. Trent's voice dropped dangerously. This is a military evacuation shuttle, Doctor, not your personal hospital. I'm ordering you to cease treatment immediately. Now, Jasper did look up, his exhausted face hardening. I took an oath, Major, to preserve life regardless of origin. That oath predates your rank this war, and any orders you might give. So unless you want to physically restrain me, which I remind you, is a war crime under Galactic Charter, I suggest you find somewhere else to be, until we reach the Condor. Their eyes locked in silent combat, neither willing to back down. It was Torres who broke the standoff, stepping between them, with her good arm raised placatingly. Sir, she addressed the Major, the child is already receiving treatment. The ethical questions can be addressed once we're safely aboard the Condor. For now, perhaps it's best to let Dr. Hayes stabilize the patient. Trent's jaw worked as he weighed his options. Finally, he jabbed a finger at Jasper. This isn't over, Hayes. The moment we dock with the Condor, I'm reporting this directly to command. I'd expect nothing less, Jasper replied, already turning back to his patient. The monitors showed her heartbeat weakening, her system struggling to compensate for the trauma. Torres, I need the synthetic plasma, the Sylvari-compatible batch. As Trent stormed away, Torres raised an eyebrow. We have Sylvari-compatible plasma. No, Jasper admitted. But I've been working on a universal substitute. It's experimental, but right now experimental is better than nothing. Torres handed him the required vials from his medical kit. You know they'll court-martial you for this when we get back to Earth. Jasper managed a grim smile as he prepared the injection. Bold of you to assume we'll make it back to Earth. The shuttle rocked violently, then throwing them both against the bulkhead. Alarm klaxons blared, and the lights flickered to emergency red. Our orbital bombardment. The pilot's panicked voice came over the intercom. Sylvari destroyers have locked onto our position. Brace for impact. The second hit came almost immediately, more devastating than the first. Jasper threw himself over the child's stretcher, using his body as a shield, as medical equipment tore free from its moorings and became deadly projectiles. Something struck him hard between the shoulder blades, sending a burst of pain down his spine. Torres, he called out, trying to spot his assistant through the smoke that was rapidly filling the cabin. There was no answer. The shuttle was spinning now, artificial gravity failing as the systems crashed. Jasper clung to the stretcher, with one hand reaching desperately for an emergency oxygen mask with the other. The child's vital signs were crashing, her tiny body going into shock from the additional trauma. Not like this, he muttered, managing to secure the mask over her face. Come on, little one. We've come too far to die now. Through the viewport he could see they were plummeting toward Azrath's surface, the red desert rising to meet them with terminal speed. The pilot was frantically trying to regain control, but Jasper could tell from the angle of their descent that it was hopeless. He strapped himself to the stretcher, enveloping the child's body with his own in a last futile attempt at protection. As the shuttle hit the atmosphere, superheating the external hull, Jasper closed his eyes and did something he hadn't done since medical school. He prayed. The impact, when it came, was both less and more violent than he'd expected. Less because the pilot had somehow managed to engage the emergency landing protocols, slowing their descent fractionally. More because no training could prepare a human body for the reality of a spacecraft crashing. Jasper's world dissolved into a cacophony of tearing metal, crushing pressure, and disorienting motion. Something struck his head with enough force to send him spiraling into darkness. His last conscious thought, a wordless apology to the small life he'd failed to save. He awoke to pain and the taste of copper in his mouth. The shuttle lay broken around him, split open like a metal egg. Pale sunlight streamed through a jagged tear in the hull, illuminating floating motes of dust and debris. The artificial gravity was gone, but Azrath's natural pull was enough to keep him pinned against what had once been the ceiling, but was now the floor. The stretcher had torn free from its restraints, But Jasper was still strapped to it, and so was the child. By some miracle, both of them had survived the crash, though the medical monitors were dead, giving him no information about her condition. With trembling fingers, he checked for a pulse breath, held until he felt the faint, rapid flutter beneath the child's jawline. Still alive, but barely. Turning his head sent waves of nausea through him, but he forced himself to assess their situation. The shuttle was devastated with no sign of other survivors in his immediate vicinity. Smoke rose from ruptured conduits, and the hiss of escaping oxygen suggested their breathable air was limited. "Torres," he called weakly, then louder. "Lieutenant Mercer, Major Trent, anyone?" Silence answered him, broken only by the creaking of settling metal and the soft, raspy breathing of the child beside him. With painful slowness, Jasper unstrapped himself from the stretcher and performed a self-assessment. Concussion, definitely. 3 cracked ribs, possibly more. Laceration on his left thigh, deep, but not arterial. Numerous contusions. Survivable if not comfortable. More urgently, he examined the child. Her condition had deteriorated significantly, the trauma of the crash compounding her already critical injuries. Without proper medical equipment, his options were severely limited. "We need to find the emergency supplies," he told her, though she remained unconscious. Talking helped him focus, pushing back the fog of his concussion. "Then we'll see about getting a distress beacon activated." He tried not to think about who might respond to such a beacon in contested space. Human rescue would mean safety for him, but likely imprisonment, or worse for the child. Sylvari rescue would mean the opposite. Neither scenario ended well for both of them. It took nearly an hour of painful searching to gather what useful supplies remained. A portable medical kit with basic instruments and medications. 2 emergency water purifiers. A week's worth of ration bars designed for human consumption, potentially toxic to the Sylvari child. A functional comm unit but with no signal strong enough to reach orbit. He was attempting to configure the comm unit to scan for local transmissions when he heard a sound that froze the blood in his veins. The distinctive whine of a Sylvari energy sword activating. Jasper turned slowly, raising his hands to show they were empty. Standing in the jagged hole torn in the shuttle's hull was a tall, elegant figure, backlit by the harsh sunlight. Female, obviously Sylvari, with the same silver skin as the child, but adorned with intricate patterns that glowed with an internal light. Her face was concealed behind a half-mask of some crystalline material, but the cold fury emanating from her was palpable. The energy sword in her hand hummed with lethal promise, its edge dripping with what appeared to be fresh blood. "Human," she said, her voice musical despite the hatred infused in the word. "You will die slowly for what you have done." Jasper remained very still, his mind racing. The newcomer's ornate armor and the elaborate crest on her shoulder marked her as no ordinary Sylvari. "I'm a doctor," he said carefully. "A healer. I'm trying to help the child." The Sylvari warrior took a step forward, her sword raising fractionally. "Lies. You abducted her from our colony, destroyed her transport, killed her guardians." "No," Jasper said, keeping his voice steady through sheer force of will. "I found her injured in a human field hospital after an orbital strike. I've been treating her injuries since then." The warrior's head tilted slightly, faceted eyes narrowing behind her mask. "You expect me to believe a human would aid a Sylvari child?" "I didn't see a Sylvari child," Jasper replied honestly. "I saw a child who needed help, that's all." For a long moment, the warrior studied him, her sword still raised. Then her gaze shifted to the makeshift medical area he'd created, taking in the careful arrangement of supplies, the improvised monitoring equipment he'd managed to salvage. "Step away from her," she commanded. Jasper complied, moving slowly to avoid triggering an attack. The warrior approached the stretcher with liquid grace, her free hand hovering over the child's body as if scanning her. The patterns on her skin flared briefly, and Jasper realized they were some form of technology, not mere decoration. "Kira," she whispered, and for the first time emotion, other than rage, colored her voice. Her hand gently touched the child's face, and the patterns on both their skins resonated in harmony for a moment. "My daughter lives. Daughter." The realization hit Jasper like a physical blow. This wasn't just any Sylvari warrior. This was the child's mother. And judging by her armor and the deference with which the other Sylvari he'd glimpsed outside the shuttle treated her, someone of significant rank. "She's very badly injured," Jasper said, calculating the risk of speaking against the importance of the information. "Crush injuries to her pelvis and lower abdomen, punctured lung, internal bleeding. I've stabilized her as best I can, but she needs advanced medical care." The warrior, the mother, did not look at him. "Our nearest medical facility was destroyed in your cowardly attack. The nearest functioning one is on our homeworld 3 systems away." Jasper's heart sank. She won't survive that journey, not in her condition. Now, the warrior did turn her sword, coming up to rest a hair's breadth from his throat. "And whose fault is that, human? You started this war. You attacked our colonies. You dropped planet killers on our children." "I didn't do any of those things," Jasper said, looking directly into her alien eyes, despite the fear coursing through him. "I'm a doctor. I save lives, human, Sylvari, whatever species needs help. And right now, your daughter needs more help than I can give her alone." The sword pressed against his skin, drawing a thin bead of blood. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't kill you where you stand." "Because I'm her best chance at survival," Jasper replied without hesitation. "And you know it, or I'd already be dead." The standoff stretched for several heartbeats. Then, with a gesture almost too quick to follow, the warrior deactivated her sword, the deadly energy dissipating into the air. "I am Valixia, Crown Princess of the Sylvari Ascendancy," she said, removing her mask to reveal a face of alien beauty, marred by a jagged scar that ran from temple to jaw. "And that is my daughter, Princess Kira, heir to the crystalline throne. If she dies because of your incompetence or treachery, I will ensure that the death of every human in this system is attributed personally to you." Jasper nodded, releasing the breath he'd been holding. "I'm Dr. Jasper Hayes, Chief Medical Officer of the Earth Alliance Expeditionary Force. And I give you my word as a physician that I will do everything in my power to save your daughter." Valixia's expression remained hard, but she stepped back, allowing him to approach the stretcher again. "What do you need?" Jasper didn't waste time questioning this tentative truce. "There's an oasis in the scarred valley about 30 kilometers east of here. According to our intelligence, it contains a temple complex with ancient medical technology predating both our civilizations. If we can get her there, we might find equipment that can help." "The Valley of Whispers," Valixia said, her tone indicating surprise. "You know of the ancestor sites." "Only that they exist, and that they sometimes contain functional medical technology," Jasper admitted, already gathering the supplies he'd managed to salvage. "It's our best option if we want to save Kira." Valixia was silent for a moment, obviously weighing her limited choices. Finally, she gave a curt nod. "My scout ship was damaged in the attack that claimed your shuttle. It cannot achieve orbit, but it remains capable of low-altitude flight. We can reach the valley in hours rather than days." Relief flooded through Jasper. Hours he could work with. Days would have meant Kira's certain death. "Then we should move quickly," he said, securing the last of his medical supplies. "Her condition is deteriorating." As if to emphasize his point, the child Kira made a small, pained sound, her tiny body trembling. Valixia was at her side, instantly murmuring in the liquid syllables of the Sylvari language, her hand stroking her daughter's forehead. For a brief moment, Jasper saw not an enemy warrior, but a mother terrified for her child. The sight made something twist in his chest, a reminder of the common ground that existed beneath the artificial divisions of war. "We'll save her," he promised quietly, and was surprised to realize he meant it with every fiber of his being. "Whatever it takes." Valixia looked up, her alien eyes meeting his human ones. No words were exchanged, but an understanding passed between them, fragile as gossamer, powerful as gravity. For Kira's sake, they were no longer enemies, at least for now. The journey to the Valley of Whispers was tense, with Jasper working continuously to keep Kira stable in the cramped confines of the Sylvari scout ship. The vessel was designed for stealth rather than comfort, with angular lines and surfaces that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Two Sylvari warriors accompanied them, silent and watchful, their distrust of Jasper evident in every rigid line of their bodies. Velixia piloted the ship herself, pushing its damaged systems to their limits as they skimmed just above the desert floor, avoiding detection from both human and Sylvari forces. Occasionally, she would glance back her eyes, seeking her daughter, or more rarely meeting Jasper's gaze with an unspoken question. "She's holding on," he would say each time, though the truth was more precarious than his words suggested. Kira's vital signs fluctuated dangerously, and twice he had to perform emergency procedures to keep her breathing. It was during one such crisis, as Jasper frantically worked to clear fluid from Kira's failing lungs, that Velixia spoke directly to him for the first time since they'd left the crash site. "Why?" she asked, the single word heavy with incomprehension. "Why would a human risk his life for a Sylvari child? You were ordered to abandon her, yet you defied your superiors. Why?" Jasper didn't look up from his work, his hands steady despite his exhaustion. "Because it was the right thing to do." "The right thing," Velixia's voice held a hint of bitterness. "Your people dropped thermobaric weapons on our nursery colonies. They poisoned the waters of Lyria Prime. They speak of us as parasites to be exterminated. Where was this right thing then?" Now, Jasper did meet her eyes, his own, filled with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. "I can't answer for all humans, Princess. Only for myself. And I've seen enough death in this war, human and Sylvari alike. Kira had done nothing to deserve dying in the ruins of that hospital, so I chose not to let it happen." Velixia studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decipher some complex code hidden in his features. "You are not what I expected, Dr. Hayes." "Call me Jasper," he said, returning his attention to Kira as her breathing stabilized again. "If we're going to save your daughter together, we might as well dispense with formalities." A ghost of something that might have been amusement flickered across Velixia's face. "Very well, Jasper. But know that if you betray my trust, I will ensure your death is remembered in Sylvari war epics for 1,000 years." "Noted," Jasper replied dryly. "Though I have to say, immortalization in alien poetry isn't high on my list of concerns right now." For the briefest moment, Velixia's expression softened, and Jasper caught a glimpse of the person beneath the warrior princess, someone with the capacity for humor, compassion, and warmth. Then her mask of regal detachment returned, and she turned back to the ship's controls. "We approach the valley," she announced. "Prepare for descent." The Valley of Whispers lived up to its name. As they descended between towering cliffs of red stone, the wind created an eerie melodic keening that seemed to carry words just beyond comprehension. At the center of the valley lay an oasis of impossible blue-green vibrancy, surrounding what appeared to be ancient ruins of some kind. "The ancestors," Velixia said, noting Jasper's wide-eyed gaze. "They were here long before either of our species reached the stars. Their knowledge of biological systems remains unmatched even now." The scout ship settled on a flat expanse of stone near the oasis. Immediately, the two warrior escorts exited, scanning for threats before signaling the all-clear. "The medical chambers would be beneath the central structure," Velixia said, as Jasper prepared Kira for transport. "If they remain intact after all these millennia." "They'll be intact," Jasper replied with more confidence than he felt. "They have to be." Together, they carried the hover stretcher from the ship, moving as quickly as caution allowed across the ancient stone pathways. The ruins rose around them, graceful arches and columns inscribed with symbols that seemed to shift when viewed directly. Despite the urgency of their mission, Jasper couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder at walking through the remnants of a civilization so advanced it might as well have been magic. "Here," Velixia said at last, stopping before a doorway that appeared to have been carved from a single, massive crystal. The healing chambers. The door had no visible handle or control panel, but as Velixia approached, the crystal began to glow, with an internal light responding to her presence. Slowly, silently, it slid open, revealing a chamber beyond that defied Jasper's understanding of architecture. The room was both larger than it should have been given the exterior dimensions of the structure, and lit by a sourceless, gentle radiance that seemed to emanate from the very air. Crystalline platforms of varying sizes and heights filled the space, each glowing with a different color. Healing cradles, Velixia explained, guiding the stretcher toward a platform of soft blue light, each attuned to different biological systems. "Will they work for her?" Jasper asked, helping to transfer Kira's small form from the stretcher to the crystal surface. "She's not fully grown. Her systems are still developing." Velixia's hand hovered over a panel of symbols near the platform. "The ancestors treated all forms of life. Age is not a barrier." She pressed a sequence of symbols, and the blue light intensified, enveloping Kira in a cocoon of gentle radiance. Additional crystal structures rose from the platform, arranging themselves around her body in a pattern that somehow suggested a detailed anatomical understanding. "Now we wait," Velixia said, stepping back. "The chamber will assess her injuries and begin the healing process." Jasper moved to a nearby crystal column, leaning against it more heavily than he'd intended. Now that the immediate crisis had passed, the adrenaline that had sustained him was fading fast, and his own injuries from the crash were making themselves known with renewed vigor. "You are injured as well," Velixia observed, her tone neutral, but her eyes sharp. "I'll live," Jasper replied, wincing as he shifted his weight. "How long before we know if the healing chamber is working?" "The initial assessment takes approximately 1 of your Earth hours," she said. "The healing itself, longer depending on the severity of injuries." Jasper nodded his eyes, never leaving Kira's small form within the blue light. "And what then, Princess? Do we go back to being enemies once she's healed? Do you still intend to kill me as promised at our first meeting?" The question hung in the air between them, unavoidable yet dangerous to acknowledge. Velixia was silent for so long that Jasper wondered if she'd simply chosen to ignore it. 3 years ago, she finally said, her voice soft but distinct, in the quiet chamber. "I made a vow before the crystalline throne. I swore that I would not rest until every human in the cross system had paid in blood for what was done to our people. I have killed 217 of your kind with my own hands since then, and ordered the deaths of thousands more." She turned to face him, fully, her alien features unreadable. "For 3 years, I have believed with absolute conviction that humanity was a plague to be eradicated for the good of all sentient life. Yet here, you stand, a human who defied his own kind to save my daughter, who has worked without rest to keep her alive, who speaks to me not as an enemy, but as a fellow being with common purpose. You forced me to question certainties I held as absolute truth," she continued. "And I find I have no answer to your question, Jasper Hayes. I do not know what we are to each other once Kira is healed." It was the most honest response she could have given, and Jasper found himself respecting her for it. "Fair enough. For now, let's focus on Kira. The rest, we'll figure out as we go." A faint smile touched Velixia's lips, transforming her face in a way that caught Jasper by surprise. "A very human approach, is it not, to proceed without a clear plan? I've found it works surprisingly well in a universe that rarely conforms to our expectations," Jasper replied, returning her smile with a tired one of his own. The moment of understanding was interrupted by a chime from the healing chamber. Symbols flashed across the crystal panel, and the blue light surrounding Kira pulsed in a rhythmic pattern. Velixia moved to the panel, her expression growing concerned as she interpreted the symbols. "The damage is more extensive than I feared. Her neural pathways show evidence of degradation from oxygen deprivation. The chamber can heal her physical injuries, but the neural damage— "Let me see," Jasper said, pushing away from the column, despite his body's protests. He studied the symbols, grateful for the Expeditionary Force's rudimentary training in ancestor script. It's showing cascading synaptic failure in her autonomic nervous system. If that continues, she'll lose the ability to maintain basic life functions. "Can the chamber reverse it?" Velixia asked the regal princess, momentarily eclipsed by the frightened mother. Jasper shook his head. "Not on its own. The damage is spreading too quickly. But—" he paused, an idea forming. "The chamber has specialized settings for neural regeneration, doesn't it?" "Yes, but they require careful calibration by a skilled operator." Velixia's patterns glowed brighter with stress. "I have basic training in ancestor technology, but nothing so specialized. Between your training and my medical knowledge, we might be able to figure it out," Jasper suggested. "The principles should be similar to neural regeneration techniques used in human medicine, just with more advanced technology." For the next several hours, they worked together in tense cooperation, combining Velixia's understanding of ancestor symbols with Jasper's medical expertise. Twice, they nearly lost Kira as her systems faltered, and twice, they managed to stabilize her through rapidly improvised procedures. It was during one such crisis, as they both worked frantically to recalibrate the chamber's neural stimulation matrix, that their hands brushed against each other on the control panel. A jolt of something unexpected passed between them. Not quite electrical, not quite emotional, but a momentary connection that caused them both to pause, despite the urgency of the situation. Their eyes met over the chamber, and in that moment, the artificial boundaries of human and Sylvari, of enemy and ally, seemed absurdly insignificant compared to the simple reality of two beings working together to save a life. The moment passed as quickly as it had come, both of them returning their focus to Kira. But something had shifted subtly, a barely perceptible change in the atmosphere between them. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of adjustments and tense monitoring, the chamber emitted a different tone, calmer, more harmonic. The symbols on the panel stabilized into a steady pattern, and the blue light surrounding Kira took on a warmer hue. "The neural degradation has stopped," Velixia said, her voice thick with exhaustion and relief. "The healing process has begun." Jasper checked the readings one more time to be certain. "It's working. She's going to need time, possibly days, but the chamber is repairing the damage." The tension drained from Velixia's body all at once, and she swayed slightly where she stood. Jasper instinctively reached out to steady her, his hand catching her arm. She did not pull away. "You should rest," he told her gently. "I can monitor the chamber for a while." "As should you," she countered, studying the dark circles under his eyes. "When did you last sleep, Doctor?" Jasper tried to remember and failed. "Before the evacuation order on Azrath, so more than 72 hours ago, I think." Velixia nodded decisively. "Then we shall take turns. The chamber has a monitoring function that will alert us to any significant changes. You will rest first while I keep watch." Too exhausted to argue, Jasper allowed himself to be guided to a smaller crystal platform that Velixia activated with a few practiced gestures. It glowed with a gentle amber light that seemed to seep into his very bones, easing the pain of his injuries and creating a profound sense of relaxation. "It will heal the worst of your physical trauma while you rest," Velixia explained, "though not as completely as Kira's chamber." "Thank you," Jasper managed, already feeling consciousness slipping away despite his best efforts to remain alert. "Wake me if there's any change." "Rest, Jasper Hayes." Velixia's voice came to him as if from a great distance. "You have earned it." As he drifted into the first real sleep he'd had in days, Jasper thought he felt a gentle touch on his forehead, 5 cool fingertips tracing a pattern that might have been a Sylvari blessing, or simply a mother's instinctive gesture of gratitude. Either way, it followed him into dreams that for once contained no screams, No explosions, and no dying faces accusingly turned toward his. He woke to the sound of voices, tense, urgent whispers that pierced the veil of his healing sleep. For a moment, disorientation clouded his mind. Where was he? Not the field hospital, not the shuttle. The ancestor chamber. Kira. Velixia. The voices grew more distinct as consciousness fully returned. Velixia, and someone else, another Silvari, speaking in their native tongue. The tone was unmistakably one of warning or concern. Jasper sat up slowly, his body protesting less than he'd expected, thanks to the healing properties of the crystal platform. The amber light had dimmed, indicating the completion of whatever regenerative cycle Velixia had initiated. Across the chamber, Velixia stood with one of her warrior escorts, engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion. Her back was to Jasper, but the rigid set of her shoulders and the rapid, emphatic gestures of her hands suggested serious news. Kira remained within the blue cocoon of her healing chamber, the rhythm of its pulsing light, steady and reassuring. Whatever the problem was, it didn't appear to be related to her condition. Jasper cleared his throat softly, as he stood, not wanting to startle them. Both Silvari turned immediately, the warrior's hand dropping to her weapon, before Velixia placed a restraining hand on her arm. "You're awake earlier than expected," Velixia observed, dismissing the warrior with a subtle gesture. As the other Silvari left the chamber, Velixia approached Jasper. "How do you feel?" "Better," he admitted, stretching cautiously to test his healing injuries. "Much better, actually. How long was I asleep?" "Approximately 6 of your Earth hours," she replied. "Kira's condition continues to improve. The chamber estimates full neural restoration within another 30 hours. Relief washed through him at the news, but Jasper couldn't ignore the obvious tension emanating from the Silvery Princess. "What's happened?" Your warrior seemed concerned. Velixia's expression grew guarded. "It is nothing that need concern you. With respect, Princess, anything that affects our safety here concerns both of us," Jasper countered. "If there's a threat—" "The threat, as you put it, is your own people," Velixia interrupted, her voice sharp. "A human battlecruiser has entered orbit around Azrath. They are deploying ground forces in a search pattern, centered on your shuttle's crash site." Jasper absorbed this information with mixed emotions. On one hand, rescue by human forces meant safety and a return to his own people. On the other hand, it potentially meant danger for Velixia, and certainly meant separation from Kira before her treatment was complete. They must have picked up the shuttle's emergency beacon, he reasoned. Standard protocol would be to search for survivors. "And what do you imagine will happen if they find us here?" Velixia asked, her voice low and intense. "Do you think they will welcome a Silvari princess with open arms? Or will they see an opportunity to capture a high-value enemy combatant?" She wasn't wrong. Despite his wish to believe the best of his fellow humans, Jasper knew the realities of war all too well. "What are you suggesting, that we abandon the healing chamber and run? Kira needs at least another day." "I am suggesting nothing of the sort," Velixia cut him off. "I will not move my daughter until her healing is complete. But you—" She hesitated, something unreadable flickering in her alien eyes. "You could signal them. Return to your people. There is no need for you to remain here and risk capture or worse when they inevitably find this place." The offer took Jasper by surprise. It was logical, even generous, from a certain perspective. Yet the thought of abandoning Kira before she was fully healed, of leaving Velixia to face whatever came alone, sat like a stone in his stomach. "I started this," he said simply. "I'm seeing it through to the end." Velixia tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that seemed to peer straight through his outer defenses. "You continue to confound my understanding of humans, Jasper Hayes." "I get that a lot," he replied with a faint smile. "So, what's the plan? Your scout ship is damaged, and even if it weren't, we can't move Kira. How long before the human forces reach this valley?" "My warrior estimates 2 days at their current rate of progress," Velixia said. "They are being cautious, sweeping thoroughly for Silvari traps." So we have time, Jasper calculated. Kira should be stable enough to move by then if the chamber's estimates are accurate. Velixia nodded. Yes, but there is another complication. My people have also detected the human battlecruiser. They are sending a destroyer to intercept it. If open combat begins in orbit, then both sides might start bombing potential ground targets, including this valley, Jasper finished grimly. How long before the Sylvari destroyer arrives? Approximately 36 hours, Velixia replied. Less time than Kira needs for full healing. Jasper ran a hand through his hair, mind racing through possibilities. We need a distraction. Something to keep both sides occupied without escalating to orbital bombardment. What do you suggest that I reveal my presence and offer myself as a target? Velixia's tone was sardonic, but there was a genuine question beneath it. No, Jasper said firmly. But we might be able to use the ancestor technology to our advantage. He gestured around the chamber. This place has power sources that have functioned for millennia. If we could access those systems, maybe we could create some kind of signal or interference that would confuse both human and Sylvari sensors, make this valley appear uninhabitable or dangerous to approach. Velixia considered this, her patterns glowing softly as she thought. There are deeper chambers beneath this one. Ancestral power sources? Yes, but also communication arrays and defensive systems. Most are dormant or locked to prevent misuse. But with your human perspective and my Sylvari knowledge, we might be able to activate something useful, Jasper finished hope-kindling. It's worth trying at least. After checking Kira's vital signs once more to ensure her stability, they descended deeper into the ancestor complex. The passages grew increasingly ornate and strange, with corridors that seemed to fold back on themselves in geometrically impossible ways, and rooms that defied conventional understanding of space. Throughout their exploration, Jasper found himself impressed by Velixia's knowledge and quick thinking. She was clearly intelligent, adaptable, and possessed a depth of understanding about ancestor technology that surprised him. In another lifetime, one without the cross-system war, he might have called her a friend, perhaps even more. The thought caught him off guard, and he pushed it aside as inappropriate, given their circumstances. They were allies of necessity, nothing more. Once Kira was healed, they would return to their respective sides of an interstellar conflict that had already claimed billions of lives. Yet as they worked together to decode the complex ancestor interfaces, that simple categorization felt increasingly inadequate. There was a connection forming between them, tentative and fragile, born of shared purpose and mutual respect, that defied the artificial boundaries of their species and allegiances. Here, Velixia said at last, leading him into a vast spherical chamber, dominated by a central column of shifting crystalline segments. This is a primary control node for the valley's defensive systems. Jasper approached the column, cautiously studying the symbols that flowed across its surface like liquid light. Can you read these sequences? They're different from the medical symbols upstairs. Not all of them, Velixia admitted. This is military script, more complex and deliberately obscured. But I recognize elements related to perimeter security and environmental manipulation. Together, they began the painstaking process of interpreting and activating the ancient systems. It was slow, frustrating work with many false starts and temporary setbacks. Twice, they triggered defensive responses from the complex itself, narrowly avoiding being trapped or injured by suddenly activated security measures. Hours passed in this manner, with periodic breaks to check on Kira's progress. The child remained stable, her healing proceeding according to the chamber's predictions, but the clock was ticking inexorably toward the arrival of both human ground forces and the Sylvari destroyer. It was during one such break, as they sat side by side on the steps, leading up to Kira's healing chamber, sharing one of Jasper's ration bars, which Velixia had cautiously determined was not toxic to Sylvari physiology, that their conversation shifted to more personal territory. You have children of your own, Valixia asked, unexpectedly watching, as Jasper checked Kira's neural readings for the dozenth time. He shook his head. No. Never found the right time or the right person. The medical track keeps you busy, and then the war. He shrugged. What about Kira's father? Is he killed in the first wave of human attacks on our colonial worlds? Valixia said, her voice flat. He was a scholar, not a warrior. He believed dialogue could prevent the conflict. He was wrong. I'm sorry, Jasper said quietly, and meant it. For what it's worth, I think he was right about dialogue. Just wrong about the timing. Valixia's gaze was distant. Perhaps. But it matters little now. The dead remain dead, and the living continue to join them in ever-increasing numbers. It doesn't have to be that way, Jasper ventured carefully. This war, it's never made sense to me. 2 centuries of peaceful coexistence, then, suddenly we're mortal enemies. There are those on both sides who benefit from this conflict, but it's not the average human, or Sylvari. You speak of conspiracy theories, Valixia said dismissively, though Jasper thought he detected a hint of uncertainty beneath her tone. I speak of patterns I've observed, he countered. Medical supply shortages that make no logistical sense. Battlefield reports that contradict official narratives. Diplomatic overtures mysteriously sabotaged before they can bear fruit. Valixia was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she stood abruptly. We should return to our work. Time grows short. Before Jasper could respond, an alarm chimed from Kira's chamber. Not the urgent tone of a medical crisis, but a softer notification indicating a change in status. Both of them moved quickly to check the displays. The neural regeneration is accelerating, Valixia said, surprise evident in her voice. The chamber estimates completion in 18 hours, now not 30. That's unexpected, Jasper said, studying the readings. But the patterns look stable. It seems the chamber has adapted its protocols to her specific neural structure more efficiently than anticipated. Relief softened Valixia's features momentarily, before her royal composure reasserted itself. Then we have more time than we thought, but still not enough. We must continue our work on the defensive systems. Their return to the control chamber was interrupted by the arrival of both Sylvari warriors. Their expressions urgent as they reported to Valixia in rapid-fire Sylvari language. Though Jasper couldn't understand the words, the tension in their postures told him all he needed to know. Something had changed, and not for the better. What is it? He asked, as the warriors finished their report. Valixia's face had gone still, her patterns pulsing with what Jasper had come to recognize as controlled anger. The human search parties have increased their pace dramatically. They will reach the valley by nightfall, not in 2 days as we estimated. That's impossible, Jasper protested. Even with atmospheric craft, the terrain between the crash site and this valley is too treacherous for rapid progress. They are not coming from the crash site, Valixia said grimly. They are coming from the direction of Blackwood Industries' mining operation in the Northern Hemisphere. The name struck Jasper like a physical blow. Blackwood Industries. They're here on Azrath. You know of them, Valixia asked sharply. They're a defense contractor, one of the largest suppliers for the Earth Alliance military. Jasper explained, his mind racing. But they shouldn't have independent operations on Azrath. This is a contested world, not a resource extraction site. One of the warriors spoke again, adding something that made Valixia's patterns flash bright with surprise. My scout reports that the human forces approaching the valley are not wearing standard Earth Alliance military uniforms, she translated. They bear the insignia of Blackwood Industries' private security force. The pieces began to fall into place in Jasper's mind, forming a picture he'd suspected, but had never been able to confirm. They're not here for me, he said slowly. They're here for you, or rather for Kira. They must have detected her life signs or yours, and realized they had a high-value Sylvari target. But how would they distinguish Sylvari life signs from human ones at that distance? Valixia questioned. And why would a private corporation involve itself in military matters to this degree? Unless... Jasper met her eyes, the final piece clicking into place. Unless they already knew exactly what they were looking for. Unless they've been monitoring the whole situation from the beginning. Valixia's expression hardened as she reached the same conclusion. You believe this corporation is not merely a supplier, but an instigator. I think we need to get into those deeper ancestor archives, Jasper replied, instead of answering directly. I think we need to find out exactly what Blackwood Industries is doing on Azrath, and why they're so interested in a Silvery princess. The decision made, they descended even further into the complex, pushing past their earlier explorations, into chambers that appeared untouched for millennia. The ancestor script grew more archaic, the technology more alien, but with growing urgency driving them, they made faster progress than before. In a circular room dominated by what appeared to be a massive data repository, they finally found what they were seeking: access to an ancestor observation system that had been quietly recording all activity on Azrath since long before humans or Silvari arrived in the system. With Valixia's knowledge of ancestral interfaces and Jasper's intuitive problem-solving, they managed to access recent records focusing on the activities of Blackwood Industries over the past 5 years, beginning shortly before the outbreak of the cross-system war. What they discovered left them both stunned into silence. Blackwood had established a secret base on Azrath 3 years before the first hostilities between humans and Silvari. From this base, they had orchestrated a series of false flag operations, making each species believe they had been attacked by the other. More damning still, they had systematically sabotaged peace initiatives from both sides, ensuring the conflict continued and escalated. They've been playing both sides, Jasper said, his voice hollow with horror and rage. Selling weapons to humans, selling intelligence to Silvari, and ensuring neither side ever comes close to ending the war. But why? Valixia asked, her own voice tight with controlled fury. What purpose could this possibly serve? The answer came in the form of geological surveys and mineral extraction reports. Azrath, it turned out, contained the largest known deposit of a rare element called xanthium, essential for next-generation weapon systems, and worth incalculable fortunes to whoever controlled it. The war had provided the perfect cover for Blackwood to establish mining operations under the guise of military necessity, extracting billions in resources, while the two species decimated each other. They're not just profiteering from the war, Jasper realized. They created it. 3 billion dead entire worlds rendered uninhabitable, and all for corporate profit. Valixia's patterns pulsed with a cold, deadly light. This evidence must reach both our governments. The war must end. Agreed, Jasper said, already working to compile and secure the data. But first, we need to deal with the Blackwood forces heading our way. And we need to finish Kira's healing. A plan began to form between them, desperate, dangerous, but with a chance of success if everything aligned perfectly. Using the Ancestor Complex's communication array, they would transmit the evidence of Blackwood's manipulation to both human and Silvari authorities simultaneously. At the same time, they would activate the Valley's defensive systems to hold off the approaching Blackwood forces until Kira's healing was complete. The execution of their plan required perfect coordination and trust. Valixia would work on activating and configuring the defensive systems, playing to her strengths with Ancestor military technology. Jasper would establish the communication links and prepare the data for transmission, as well as continue monitoring Kira's healing progress. As they worked, a subtle shift occurred in their relationship, the last vestiges of enemy status falling away, replaced by the solid foundation of shared purpose and mutual respect. They moved in harmony, anticipating each other's needs, building on each other's insights, functioning like partners who had worked together for years, rather than adversaries thrown together by circumstance. The first test of their plan came sooner than expected. As night fell over the Valley of Whispers, the perimeter sensors Valixia had activated detected the first Blackwood scouts entering the outer reaches of the valley. "They're moving faster than we anticipated," she reported, studying the tactical display they had configured from the ancestor systems. "And they have advanced tech that's partially blocking the defensive measures I've set up." "How many?" Jasper asked, temporarily abandoning his work on the communication array. "At least 30 in the first wave," Valixia said grimly. "Heavily armed. They're splitting into smaller units to approach from multiple directions. Time until they reach the complex? 2 hours, perhaps less, if they manage to bypass more of our defenses." Jasper checked the status of Kira's healing chamber. "She needs another 8 hours at minimum. We need to buy that time." Valixia's warriors had been stationed at the complex's main entrance, but 2 against 30 were not odds that inspired confidence. They needed something more. "The ancestor weapon systems," Jasper suggested. "Can we activate them remotely?" Valixia shook her head. "Most require direct neural interface. I could operate 1, perhaps 2, simultaneously, but no more." "Then we fight," Jasper said simply. "You and your warriors hold them off as long as possible, while I finish the communications array and get the evidence ready to transmit. Once that's done, I'll join you." Valixia studied him, surprise evident in her expression. "You would fight against your own kind." "Blackwood isn't my kind," Jasper replied firmly. "They're war profiteers who've caused the deaths of billions human and Sylvari alike. I'm a doctor sworn to preserve life. Fighting them serves that oath better than standing aside." A slow smile spread across Valixia's face, the first true smile he'd seen from her, transforming her alien features from regal beauty to something warmer and more approachable. "I misjudged humans, it seems. Or perhaps just you, Jasper Hayes." Before he could respond, she stepped forward and placed her hand against his chest, directly over his heart. The gesture was formal, ceremonial, her patterns glowing with deliberate intent. "By the light of the crystalline throne, I name you ally to the Sylvari ascendancy." She intoned the words, carrying the weight of ancient tradition. "May your path be illuminated, even in darkness." The unexpected honor left Jasper momentarily speechless. He covered her hand with his own, instinctively returning the gesture. "And I promise, by whatever oaths still matter in this war-torn universe, that I'll stand with you against those who profit from suffering human or Sylvari." Their eyes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them that transcended the barriers of species and conflict. Then, with mutual reluctance, they separated to prepare for the battle ahead. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Jasper worked frantically on the communications array, adapting the ancient technology to modern frequencies, while simultaneously monitoring Kira's progress. Valixia and her warriors prepared the complex's defenses, setting traps and establishing choke points to maximize their effectiveness against superior numbers. When the attack came, it was more coordinated and better equipped than they had feared. Blackwood's forces had electromagnetic pulse weapons that temporarily disabled the ancestor defensive systems, allowing them to penetrate deeper into the complex than anticipated in the first assault. Jasper heard the sounds of energy weapons and the distinctive hum of Valixia's sword long before he finished his work on the communications array. By the time he secured the data package and set it for automatic transmission, the battle had moved alarmingly close to the central chambers. Grabbing a fallen Sylvari energy weapon, he made his way toward the sound of combat, pausing only long enough to check on Kira. The child remained peaceful within her healing cocoon, unaware of the battle raging to protect her. He found Valixia and her warriors in a wide corridor, fighting a desperate holding action against black-armored Blackwood operatives. One warrior was down, critically injured, but still firing with grim determination. Valixia herself was a blur of lethal grace, her energy sword cleaving through armor and flesh with equal ease. Jasper joined the fight without hesitation, his medical training giving him intimate knowledge of human vulnerabilities that he now exploited with ruthless efficiency. He wasn't a trained soldier, but desperation and righteous anger made him deadly nonetheless. The tide of battle ebbed and flowed through the complex's convoluted passages. Twice, they were forced to retreat deeper into the structure, and twice, they managed to counterattack, pushing the Blackwood forces back temporarily. But it was clear that they were merely delaying the inevitable. More operatives kept arriving, and their own resources were finite. During a brief lull in the fighting, Jasper and Velixia found themselves momentarily alone in a small alcove, catching their breath as the sound of approaching boots echoed from multiple directions. "The transmission?" Velixia asked, her voice steady, despite the burn mark scoring one cheek where an energy blast had come too close. "Ready to go," Jasper replied, checking the improvised bandage on his arm where a vibroblade had cut deeply. "But the timing has to be perfect. If we transmit too soon, Blackwood might be able to jam the signal before enough data gets through. Too late, and we might not get the chance at all." "And Kira?" "Making progress, but still at least 5 hours from completion." Jasper didn't sugarcoat the reality. "We need to hold them off until then." Velixia nodded grimly, her patterns pulsing with determination. "Then we hold." As they prepared to rejoin the fight, Velixia suddenly paused, turning to face Jasper fully. "If we don't survive this—" "We will," he interrupted firmly. "If we don't," she continued regardless, "I want you to know that in another life under different stars, I would have been proud to call you friend. Perhaps more than friend." Before Jasper could respond, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his, a gesture of profound intimacy in Sylvari culture, one reserved for family and beloved companions. Her patterns resonated against his skin, creating a sensation unlike anything he had ever experienced, a connection that seemed to bypass physical boundaries and touch something deeper. The moment lasted only seconds before they were forced apart by the sound of approaching enemies. But something had changed between them, a bond forged that neither war, nor species, nor death itself could fully sever. They fought with renewed determination, after that their movements synchronized as if they'd trained together for years. Jasper found himself anticipating Velixia's attacks, providing covering fire exactly when needed, moving in perfect complement to her more aggressive style. But the numbers against them continued to grow. Velixia's remaining warrior fell to a concentrated barrage of energy fire, and they were forced to retreat all the way back to the central chamber, where Kira's healing cocoon still glowed with steady blue light. "This is it," Jasper said, taking position behind a fallen column. "We make our stand here. I'll trigger the transmission as they breach the door." Velixia nodded, her sword at the ready. "For Kira, for peace." "For a future worth having," Jasper agreed. The door to the chamber shuddered under heavy impact, the ancient crystal cracking but holding firm. It wouldn't last long against the concentrated assault. Jasper's finger hovered over the transmission trigger, waiting for the perfect moment. When the door finally shattered, sending crystal shards flying across the chamber, Jasper hit the trigger an instant before diving for cover. The communications array came to life, pulsing with energy, as it began broadcasting the damning evidence to every receiver in the system, human Sylvari, and any neutral observers who might be listening. The Blackwood operatives poured into the chamber, their weapons firing in a devastating fusillade that chewed into ancient stone and crystal alike. Jasper and Velixia returned fire from behind whatever cover they could find, knowing they were outnumbered and outgunned, but determined to buy every possible second for the transmission to complete and for Kira's healing to continue. "Target the broadcast array," a commanding voice ordered from among the Blackwood forces. "Shut it down at all costs." Several operatives redirected their fire toward the communications equipment, but Jasper had anticipated this. He'd rigged redundant systems, ensuring that the transmission would continue, even if parts of the array were destroyed. The battle intensified, the chamber filling with energy bolt smoke and the smell of ozone. Jasper took a hit to his shoulder that spun him around and sent his weapon flying. He crawled desperately for new cover, aware that he'd become an easy target. Velixia saw his predicament and moved with incredible speed, placing herself between him and the incoming fire, her sword a blur that somehow deflected energy bolts back toward their source. But even her remarkable skill couldn't hold against such numbers indefinitely. A concentrated burst caught her in the side, sending her staggering. In that moment of vulnerability, a second shot struck her squarely in the chest and she fell. "No!" Jasper's cry tore from him before he could think. He abandoned cover entirely, rushing to her side, despite the fire directed his way. By some miracle, he reached her without being hit again. Her patterns still glowed, but faintly flickering like a failing light. The wound in her chest smoked slightly, the energy blast having cauterized, even as it damaged. "The transmission?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the chaos of battle. Jasper glanced at the communications array. 80% complete, almost there. "Kira." "Still safe," he assured her, applying emergency medical techniques to stabilize her condition. It was bad, but not immediately fatal, if he could get her proper treatment soon. "Just hold on, please, Velixia, hold on." A shadow fell across them, and Jasper looked up to find a Blackwood operative standing over them, weapon aimed directly at his head. The man's face was obscured by a tactical helmet, but his posture radiated cruel satisfaction. "Dr. Hayes," the operative said, his voice modulated through his helmet speaker. "Director Vance sends his regards. He's quite disappointed in your choices today." Jasper tensed, preparing for the shot that would end his life. In that moment, his only regret was that he wouldn't see Kira fully healed, wouldn't know if their transmission had succeeded in exposing Blackwood's crimes. The shot never came. Instead, the operative's head suddenly jerked sideways as a projectile struck his helmet with devastating force. He crumpled to the ground, revealing a new group entering the chamber from a side entrance Jasper hadn't even known existed. They weren't Blackwood operatives. They weren't even human. Sylvari warriors poured into the room, their weapons cutting down the surprised Blackwood forces with ruthless efficiency. But they weren't alone. Among them, fighting with equal determination, were soldiers wearing the distinctive blue and gold of the Earth Alliance Peacekeeping Force, a branch separate from the regular military tasked with conflict resolution rather than combat operations. The battle was over in minutes, with the remaining Blackwood operatives surrendering or dying where they stood. As the smoke cleared, a human officer and a Sylvari commander approached, where Jasper still knelt beside Velixia. "Dr. Hayes," the human officer asked, removing her helmet to reveal a woman in her 50s, with close-cropped gray hair. "I'm Commander Ellen Reyes, Earth Alliance Peacekeeping. We received your transmission, or at least the first part of it. Enough to know we needed to move in immediately." The Sylvari commander likewise removed his ceremonial face covering. "I am Soreth Third Blade of the Crystalline Throne. We also received your transmission, Princess Velixia." He bowed deeply toward the injured Sylvari royal. "Your evidence has already been presented to the Ascendancy Council. They have ordered an immediate ceasefire in all theaters." "The Earth Alliance has done the same," Commander Reyes added. "Though there are complications with certain elements of both militaries that were deeply involved with Blackwood. We're still untangling the web of corruption." Jasper hardly dared believe what he was hearing. A ceasefire, actually happening both sides. "It's fragile," Reyes admitted. "And there are those who will resist. But yes, Doctor, for the first time in 3 years, humans and Sylvari are not actively trying to kill each other across the cross system." A weak laugh escaped Velixia, turning into a grimace of pain. "We did it, Jasper. We actually did it." "Medical team," Jasper called, urgently, worried by the fading light of her patterns. "She needs immediate treatment." Both human and Sylvari medics rushed forward, working together with the kind of cooperation that would have been unthinkable just days before. As they stabilized Velixia for transport, Jasper moved to check on Kira's healing chamber. To his astonishment, the blue light was beginning to recede, the crystal structures withdrawing, as the healing process completed itself, hours ahead of even the accelerated schedule. As the last of the energy cocoon dissipated, Kira's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, she looked confused, her jewel-like eyes darting around the unfamiliar surroundings. Then her gaze found Jasper, and recognition dawned in those alien but unmistakably childlike features. "You," she said in halting English, surprising Jasper, who hadn't realized she knew the language. "You helped me when I was hurt." He knelt beside the healing platform, bringing himself to her eye level. "Yes, Kira. My name is Jasper. I'm a doctor, a healer." "Jasper," she repeated carefully. Then, with childlike directness, "Where is my mother?" "She's here," he assured her, gesturing to where the medical team was preparing to move Velixia. "She's hurt, but she'll be okay. She fought very bravely to protect you." Kira's small hand reached out, touching his cheek with innocent curiosity. "You fought too. I saw it. In my dreams." Before Jasper could respond, Commander Reyes approached again. "Dr. Hayes, we need to move Princess Velixia to our medical ship immediately. Princess Kira as well for evaluation." "I'm coming with them," Jasper said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. Reyes nodded, seemingly unsurprised. "I expected as much. Our ship will take you all to the neutral medical facility on Elysia. It's the most advanced in the sector, with both human and Sylvari medical staff." As they prepared to leave the Ancestor complex, Sorith approached Jasper once more. "The princess named you ally to the Sylvari ascendancy," he said, having obviously witnessed Velixia's formal pronouncement earlier. "Such an honor has never before been bestowed upon a human." "I didn't do it for honors," Jasper replied simply. "I did it because it was right." Sorith's alien features arranged themselves into what might have been a smile. "Perhaps that is precisely why the honor was deserved." The journey to Elysia passed in a blur of medical activities and debriefings. Jasper refused to leave Velixia's side during her treatment, contributing his knowledge of both her injuries and Sylvari physiology to the medical team. Kira, once she understood that both her mother and Jasper would recover, became an unexpected bridge between the human and Sylvari personnel, her childlike innocence cutting through centuries of mistrust with simple questions and observations that often left both species speechless. By the time they reached the Elysian medical facility, news of the Blackwood conspiracy had spread throughout human and Sylvari space. Public outrage was overwhelming, with citizens of both species demanding accountability, not just from the corporation itself, but from the military and political leaders who had either been complicit or willfully blind. Interplanetary peace talks were hastily organized, with Elysia nominated as neutral ground for the negotiations. As one of the few individuals trusted by both sides, Jasper found himself appointed as a medical advisor to the Joint Commission, overseeing the talks, a role he accepted with reluctance, but growing determination to see the peace process succeed. Velixia's recovery took weeks, her injuries more severe than initially assessed. During that time, Jasper became Kira's de facto guardian, balancing his new diplomatic duties with hours spent entertaining the young princess, teaching her about human culture, while learning more about Sylvari traditions in return. When Velixia finally regained enough strength to leave her medical suite, her first act was to formally address both the human and Sylvari delegations at the peace talks. Standing tall, despite the visible evidence of her injuries, she spoke with the authority of her royal heritage, but also with the compassion of someone who had seen beyond the artificial divisions of species. "3 years ago, I swore an oath to kill every human in the cross system," she began, her voice resonating through the Grand Chamber. "I believed with absolute conviction that humanity was a plague that needed to be eradicated for the good of all sentient life. I was wrong." A murmur ran through the assembled delegates as she continued. "One human, a doctor named Jasper Hayes, showed me that beyond the boundaries of species and politics, beyond the artificial hatreds manufactured by those who profit from our conflicts, there exists a more fundamental truth, that life in all its forms is precious." Her gaze found Jasper in the audience, and something passed between them, unspoken but profound. "Dr. Hayes saved my daughter's life when his own military ordered him to abandon her. He fought alongside me against those who sought to prolong this senseless war for profit. He demonstrated that courage, compassion, and integrity transcend the differences that divide us. Turning to address the Sylvari delegation directly, Velixia made a formal declaration that sent shockwaves through the gathered representatives. As Crown Princess of the Sylvari Ascendancy and heir to the crystalline throne, I hereby renounce all claims of collective guilt against humanity for the cross-system war. The evidence is irrefutable. We were manipulated into conflict by those who stood to gain from our mutual destruction. Similar declarations followed from the human delegation, setting the stage for a formal peace treaty that would not only end hostilities, but establish new protocols for joint governance of disputed territories, shared resource development, and cultural exchange programs designed to rebuild the trust destroyed by the war. It was an imperfect beginning fraught with challenges and setbacks. Old hatreds did not disappear overnight, and the architects of the conflict, those who had not been directly implicated in the Blackwood conspiracy, often worked quietly to undermine the peace process. But it was a beginning nonetheless, a fragile seed of possibility planted in soil that had known only the barrenness of war for too long. In the months that followed as the peace process slowly advanced, Jasper found his role evolving from emergency physician to diplomat to something more fundamental, a bridge between worlds. His experiences with Velixia and Kira had given him insights into Sylvari culture that few humans possessed, and his medical background provided practical avenues for cooperation that transcended political complications. Velixia, too, found herself transformed by their shared journey. The warrior princess who had sworn to exterminate humanity became one of the most vocal advocates for reconciliation and cooperation, much to the consternation of hardliners within the Sylvari Ascendancy. With Kira at her side, the child now equally comfortable in human or Sylvari company, she worked tirelessly to heal wounds that went deeper than flesh. It was nearly a year after their fateful meeting on Azrath, when Jasper and Velixia found themselves once more on that desert world, but under vastly different circumstances. The Valley of Whispers had been designated a joint heritage site, protected by both human and Sylvari authorities, as both a historical monument and a symbol of the cooperation that had ended the war. They stood together at the edge of the oasis, watching as Kira splashed happily in the shallow water, her laughter carrying on the warm desert breeze. Behind them, a mixed group of human and Sylvari scientists worked carefully to restore and study the ancestor complex that had played such a pivotal role in changing the course of history. "Did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" Jasper asked, glancing at Velixia. "A year ago, I mean, when you had your sword at my throat." A smile touched her lips, something that came more easily to her now than it once had. "I imagined many futures in that moment, Jasper Hayes. Your continued existence featured in none of them. And yet here I am," he replied with a smile of his own, "still continuing to exist quite persistently." "Indeed." She turned to face him fully, her expression growing more serious. "The Crystalline Council has approved my proposal. I am to lead a new diplomatic mission to Earth, with the goal of establishing permanent Sylvari representation there. Kira will accompany me, of course." Jasper nodded, having expected something of the sort. Velixia's star had risen dramatically within the Sylvari political hierarchy since the peace accord. "Earth is, well, it's complicated, but I think you'll find most humans more welcoming than you expect, especially once they get to know Kira. I will need advisors familiar with human culture and politics," she continued, watching him carefully. "Individuals who understand both worlds and can navigate the complexities of this new relationship we are building." "Anyone in mind?" Jasper asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Just one," Velixia replied softly. "Though I understand if your duties here—" "Yes," he interrupted, surprising them both with his immediacy. "I mean, yes, I'll come with you to Earth, if you'll have me." The patterns on her skin brightened with unmistakable pleasure. "I would have no other, Jasper Hayes." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching as Kira discovered a small, iridescent lizard at the water's edge and began a careful, gentle pursuit of the creature. "She's going to change everything you know," Jasper said eventually. A Silvari child raised with equal exposure to both cultures, who sees no fundamental difference between our species. "She's the future we're fighting for." "Not fighting," Valixia corrected gently. "Building, growing." She gestured to a small clearing near the oasis, where earlier that day they had participated in a ceremonial, planting a rare crystalline tree, native to the Silvari homeworld, capable of surviving even in Azrath's harsh climate with proper care. The sapling stood barely knee-high, its translucent branches catching the desert sunlight and refracting it into 1,000 tiny rainbows that danced across the sand. It was delicate, vulnerable to a dozen potential threats, requiring constant attention and protection to survive, much like peace itself. "It will grow," Valixia said with quiet certainty. "Perhaps not in our lifetime, but it will grow. And those who come after us will rest in its shade and wonder how there was ever a time when humans and Silvari were enemies rather than allies." Jasper reached out his hand, finding hers, with the ease of long familiarity. Their fingers intertwined 5 human digits against 6 Silvari ones, different yet perfectly compatible in their own way. "I think," he said, watching, as Kira ran toward them, her face alight with the simple joy of discovery, "that we might live to see more of that future than you imagine." Valixia's answer was lost as Kira reached them, enthusiastically describing her new lizard friend in a cheerful mix of English and Silvari language. But the pressure of her hand against Jasper's spoke volumes, conveying hope and promise and possibilities yet to be explored. Above them, the red sky of Azrath was changing as the sun began to set, the harsh crimson softening to gentler hues of pink and gold. Once, such a sky had been stained with the smoke of orbital bombardment and the flashes of weapons fire. Now, it witnessed only the quiet tableau of a human, a Silvari, and a child who belonged equally to both worlds, standing together at the edge of an oasis in a desert that had once known only war, but might yet nurture peace. And beneath their feet, in soil watered by the blood of both species, a crystalline sapling reached its branches toward the fading light, growing stronger with each passing day.